Not long after I uncovered my wife's affair, I made the quiet decision to leave without a scene. 3.5 years into our marriage, everything I believed about our life together collapsed. About a year after I disappeared from her life, my now ghosted ex somehow managed to track me down once she heard that I knew about the betrayal. By then, I had already moved away, settling in a quiet place up in the hills. I'm not entirely sure why I feel the urge to write all of this down now. Maybe putting it into words will help someone else someday. The ordeal is long behind me, and I've managed to move forward. Back in February of 2018, after 3.5 years of marriage, I discovered that my wife had been having an affair. At the time, I was working a contract position that sometimes demanded frequent travel, though it also allowed me to work from home whenever I wasn't on the road. I served as a director for a technical sales company, which kept me busy but also gave me flexibility. My wife, on the other hand, held a very high-paying position of her own. Lately, things between us had grown a bit tense, mostly because she had been putting in longer and longer hours while my job often pulled me out of town. Even with those challenges, I still believed our marriage was solid. Honestly, I would have described it as a very good one. To give some background, I first met the woman who would eventually become my wife about 5 years earlier at a cookout hosted by a mutual friend. From the moment we started talking, there was an immediate connection between us. Conversation flowed naturally, and before long it felt like we had known each other far longer than we actually had. If I'm being honest, at the time I couldn't help feeling that being with someone as striking and well-spoken as her was a major win for me. Somehow my rough, slightly unpolished personality seemed to draw her in. Within just a few weeks of dating, we were completely taken with each other. Whenever we met at one another's apartments, the attraction between us was impossible to ignore, and it didn't take long before our clothes ended up scattered across the floor. After about 18 months together, we decided to get married and moved into a spacious apartment while putting money aside for a future home. Things started to shift once we passed the 3-year mark in our marriage. Even though my feelings for her hadn't changed, I began noticing how quickly she would snap over the smallest things. Whenever I brought up her constant late nights or the growing number of work outings, she would immediately become irritated. Since she had been steadily climbing the corporate ladder, she insisted that all of it was simply part of paying her dues. That was the explanation she always gave. She would remind me that my job often took me away for days at a time, claiming I had no right to question her schedule. The truth was, my travel wasn't nearly as frequent as she made it sound. Most of the time I was only gone for 3 or 4 days every 5 weeks or so. I even told her I'd be willing to cut back on those trips if it helped. Still, those conversations never really went anywhere. They just circled around the same points again and again without any real resolution. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was back then. At the time, I had no idea that my wife was involved in an affair. Aside from the fact that our intimacy had started fading and she was constantly working late, nothing seemed obvious enough for me to question what was really happening. Up until then, I never would have imagined something like that was happening. I simply believed she was worn out from the pressures of her job. Still, the constant rejection whenever I tried to initiate intimacy began to chip away at my confidence. It was hard not to take it personally. She did have a separate work phone and could have been using it for private messages, but I never noticed the kind of secretive texting I had read about in articles online. At home, she often retreated into the spare bedroom, which she had turned into a home office, and spent long stretches of time in there. Around September 2017, Kathy's routine started changing even more. Instead of coming straight home after work, she began attending what she described as work-related gatherings in the evenings. At first it happened maybe once a week, but before long it grew to 3 or more nights every week. I've never been the jealous type, and I understood that in her position she would inevitably attract attention, especially since most of the executives she worked with were men. I assumed she simply knew how to brush off any advances and stay focused on her career. That was the impression she always gave. The first moment when real suspicion crept in came about a month before what I now think of as D-Day. One evening she stopped by the supermarket on her way home, and when she arrived she asked me to help carry the groceries inside. As I leaned into the back seat of her car to grab a few bags, I noticed something pink catching the light just under the front passenger seat. Curious, I reached down and pulled it out. It was a bra. My wife's bra. She favored a particular brand from a specific store, so I recognized it immediately. Looking back now, that should have been an obvious warning sign. Whenever she was feeling especially passionate, the first thing she usually slipped off under her clothes was her bra. For reasons I still can't fully explain, the moment I saw it lying there, a wave of nausea hit me. My stomach dropped instantly. I couldn't make sense of why it would be shoved beneath the seat of her car. I kept quiet and didn't say another word. My heart was pounding so violently, it felt like I might faint. When I carried the grocery bags into the kitchen, Kathy looked at me with concern and asked if I was okay, saying I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. I brushed off her comment and said nothing. It took every ounce of control I had to hide what I was feeling, but I forced myself to stay calm and not show how shaken I really was. In that moment, I made up my mind that I needed to find out the truth, whether she was actually seeing someone else or if I was imagining things. That night, and into the next day, my thoughts kept circling back to every little sign I might have missed. Aside from the bra, I had nothing that could truly be called proof. She worked in an office building downtown, and we lived in a fairly large city where long hours and social events weren't unusual. Eventually, I decided to push the idea of an affair aside for the moment and instead focus on giving her more attention. Maybe that was what our relationship needed. One Friday after work, I went all out. I cooked an elaborate meal, set the table with our nicest plates and silverware, and even lit candles to make the evening feel special. On my way home, I stopped to buy a bouquet of flowers and a good bottle of wine. When she arrived later that evening, breezing in the door the way she always did after work, I pointed out the dinner I had prepared and everything I had set up. She looked apologetic almost immediately and told me she was sorry, but she had plans to meet some coworkers at a local hangout. She mentioned she wanted to take a quick shower first, but said she could grab a small bite with me before heading out. I must have gone completely silent at that point because it felt like my stomach had twisted into knots. The frustration and anger building inside me was overwhelming. I had reached my limit. While she was in the shower, I quietly took my work phone and slipped it into the back seat of her car. I'd been thinking about doing that so I could track where she went using my other phone. After that, I walked back into the kitchen and dumped the dinner, the flowers, everything straight into the trash. When she came out of the shower, dressed and looking as beautiful as ever, she smiled and said, "All right, let's eat." I told her not to worry about it and to just go out with her friends. She gave me a strange look and asked if I was angry. I told her I wasn't angry, just disappointed that she never seemed interested in spending time with me anymore. That set her off. She rolled her eyes and sarcastically commented on how quickly I lost my temper, telling me to stop acting like a child. I muttered "foolish me" under my breath as I stood there, letting the reality of everything sink in. For once, I had hoped we could simply spend an evening together. She responded with a sly little smile before storming out the door. As soon as she left, I pulled out my second phone and started tracking the location of my work phone. About 20 minutes later, it showed her stopping at a bar she often visited with coworkers. I decided to drive over and see for myself. When I arrived, I spotted her car sitting in the parking lot exactly where the signal said it would be. I parked across the street and waited, watching the entrance carefully to see if she would appear. I felt strangely out of place sitting there, almost like some kind of stalker watching from the shadows. Still, I kept reminding myself that I needed answers, that I had to face whatever the truth might be about where she really was. About an hour after I arrived, I finally saw her come out of the bar with a man. From the way he carried himself and how he was dressed, he looked like one of the executives from her company. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, and then kissed her on the lips. In that instant, my entire body went numb. My stomach twisted painfully as I watched them walk together toward another car and climb inside. When their vehicle pulled out of the lot, I followed from a distance, doing my best not to lose them. It didn't take long before they turned into a hotel about 10 minutes away. I parked along the street nearby and watched as they stepped out of the car, still holding hands, before disappearing through the hotel entrance together. That was all I needed to see. I sat there feeling like an absolute fool. Frustration exploded out of me, and I started slamming my fists against the steering wheel. After that moment, something inside me seemed to shut down completely. I can't really explain it. It was almost like my mind went blank, as if I had stepped outside myself for a while. When I finally gathered my thoughts again, the only thing I wanted was a drink. Without really thinking, I started driving out of town, the scenes I had just witnessed replaying over and over in my head, anger mixed with humiliation. And to my own embarrassment, I found myself crying as I drove. Eventually, I came across a small tavern on the outskirts of town, maybe 30 miles away, and pulled in. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender, a woman, glanced at me and remarked that I looked like someone had completely knocked the wind out of my sails. Judging by her expression, I must have looked like a man barely holding himself together. With a weak half-smile, I replied, "You could say that." Not long after, a man sat down beside me and started up a conversation. Normally, I wouldn't have been in the mood to talk to anyone, but there was something about him that immediately put me at ease. Before long, we were chatting like old acquaintances, and eventually the topic drifted to the reason I looked so miserable: my wife's betrayal. I told him that the only thing I wanted at that moment was to get as far away from her as possible and somehow erase her from my mind. He gave me a reassuring pat on the back and said, "You're not alone, buddy." After studying me for a moment, he added that he had gone through something similar a few years earlier. According to him, experiences like that can push a person in one of two directions. Your life can go down a good road or a bad one, he said. Right now, the choice is completely yours. For some reason, those words snapped me out of the fog I'd been sinking into. Even though the pain was still there, I've always tried to think things through logically, and I had to admit he was right. We introduced ourselves properly. His name was Ray. I immediately liked him. He had that genuine, down-to-earth personality, the kind of guy who felt real and straightforward, even if he clearly had more of a country background than I did. After a moment, he asked, "So, are you planning to move out?" The truth was, I hadn't even thought that far ahead. My mind had been stuck in that fight-or-flight mode, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I didn't want to be anywhere near my wife anymore. Ray leaned forward and said he had an idea. He told me he genuinely felt bad for what I was going through. On a piece of land he owned, he had an old mobile trailer sitting unused. It wasn't anything fancy and would probably need some work, but he suggested I come take a look at it. If I liked it, he said he'd practically give it to me for a bargain. I could park it on his property, and in return I could keep an eye on the place for him from time to time. "Might help you get away from all this," he said casually. "Just something to think about." I sat there for a moment, trying to process what he was offering. Before I could say anything, the bartender, who had clearly been listening in, jumped into the conversation. With a sympathetic smile, she said that if she'd been given a chance to escape her crazy ex-husband years ago, she would have taken it in a heartbeat, even if it meant living in a trailer just to clear her head. The whole situation felt surreal, like I had somehow stepped into the Twilight Zone. Still, a part of me wondered if this strange offer might actually be exactly what I needed. After thinking it over for a bit, I told Ray I would consider it, and maybe come check the place out. Eventually, we went our separate ways, agreeing to meet at his property in a few days. For the first time since everything had happened, I felt like I had a little bit of perspective and maybe even a way to escape what felt like both heartbreak and a nightmare rolled into one. One thing, however, was crystal clear in my mind. I never wanted to share another moment of my life with my wife. Cheating had always been something I found absolutely disgusting, the one line I believed I would never allow anyone to cross. Later that night, when I returned home, I sat down on the couch. Kathy eventually walked out and asked where I had been. I looked up at her and turned the question back on her. "Where were you tonight?" I asked. She casually replied that she had gone out for drinks. I didn't bother circling around it. I looked straight at her and asked, "Are you having an affair?" For a split second, she looked completely caught off guard, but she quickly composed herself. With a puzzled expression, she said, "No. Why would you even ask me that?" I told her I'd heard she might be involved with someone from her office. She immediately asked who had told me that. I replied that it was someone I knew, but I refused to reveal a name. After rolling her eyes and saying I was being ridiculous, she accused me of being drunk and out of my mind, then demanded to know where I had been all evening. I casually answered that I had gone out to a bar to have a few drinks with friends. She looked like she wanted to press the issue further, but instead she turned away, went into the bedroom, and got ready for bed. Now that I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and knew she had been lying to me for months, there was no way I could sleep beside her. I chose the couch that night. Sleep never came anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her in that hotel room with the other man. The images kept replaying in my mind, leaving me feeling humiliated, sick to my stomach, and deeply hurt. But somewhere in the middle of that long night, my thoughts drifted back to Ray and the trailer he had mentioned. Strangely enough, the idea lifted my mood a little. It felt almost like a sudden moment of clarity. Something in me had already shifted despite the pain I was feeling. My instincts were pushing me toward escape rather than confrontation. The next morning, we barely spoke to each other. The rest of the weekend passed in an awkward silence, both of us acting as though nothing unusual had happened. A few days later, I met up with Ray as we had planned. When I arrived, I was surprised to see how nice his ranch property actually was. The trailer he had mentioned turned out to be better than I expected too, about 26 feet long and already furnished. Seeing it brought back memories of a road trip I had taken during spring break in college with a few friends. Ray accepted the payment I offered him for it, though honestly he seemed like he would have given it to me for almost nothing. After that, I drove out to look at the piece of land where he said I could park it. The area was beautiful. There were trails nearby for hiking and biking, and the land itself was filled with trees and scrubby vegetation that gave it a quiet, secluded feel. Ray had a small cabin sitting up on a hill overlooking the property, and there was already access to electricity and water where the trailer could be placed. The foothills of some nearby mountains weren't far away either. Ray assured me he'd help move the trailer out there and get everything set up for me. Over the next few weeks, I tried more than once to get Kathy to finally admit what was going on. Every attempt led to the same result: more denial, more manipulation, and a steady stream of gaslighting. At one point, I even warned her directly that if I ever found undeniable proof she was cheating, there would be no coming back from it. Instead of backing down, she seemed to sink even deeper into whatever fantasy she was living in, and reacted by lashing out with stronger denials. The whole thing was almost laughable because the lies were so poorly delivered. More than once I kicked myself for not taking pictures of her with the guy that night. Without something concrete, I had no physical evidence to prove what I already knew in my gut. Eventually I realized that I didn't need proof anymore. After all the emotional strain I had been through, I knew I wanted out of the marriage. Rather than confronting Kathy with my decision, I chose to keep it to myself and quietly start preparing. Whenever she was at work, I began slowly moving my belongings out of the apartment and transporting them to the trailer. It wasn't much at first, just small things here and there, but at least it made me feel like I was taking control of the situation. During that time, I noticed a slight shift in Kathy's behavior. She seemed a little more pleasant toward me than she had been before, almost as if she was trying to smooth things over. But in my mind, it didn't matter anymore. It felt like too little, far too late. I had already reached the point where I needed distance from her. Meanwhile, she kept going out with her coworkers after work just like before. One evening as she was heading out, I started getting ready myself. She paused at the door, looked at me, and asked where I was going. I told her I was meeting up with some friends. When she started asking more questions, I cut her off and said she wouldn't enjoy it anyway, because it was mostly work-related conversation, and she didn't know any of them. Ironically, those were the exact words she used to give me whenever I asked to join her for one of her office outings. She looked slightly annoyed but shrugged it off and said, "All right, have a good time." "I definitely will," I replied. Over the following weeks, I started making new acquaintances while spending time working on the trailer and hanging out with Ray at the local bar. Getting to know Ray's family and friends helped more than I expected. Being around good people lifted my spirits and made the whole situation feel less heavy. Around the same time, I made a conscious decision to cut back on my drinking. The last thing I wanted was to replace one problem in my life with another unhealthy habit. I knew better than to drown myself in self-pity, even though it would have been incredibly easy to fall into that trap. Around that time, Kathy mentioned that she would be leaving the following week for a work trip. According to her, several members of the executive team and a few department heads were going along. When I asked who exactly would be attending, I added with a glance in her direction, "Hope you and your boyfriend have a great time." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted it, because it set off a heated argument. Still, like Ray had told me, none of it really mattered anymore. Looking back now, I sometimes wish I had known more about the man she was involved with. But Ray had already given me his perspective on that. It doesn't matter who the other guy is, he had said. What matters is that she chose to betray you. She's the one who wrecked the marriage, whether she ever admits it or not. Facts are facts, brother. Honestly, Ray probably could have written a book for people who had been cheated on. When Kathy left for her supposed work trip, I realized it was the perfect chance to move out completely. While she was gone, I packed up everything that belonged to me. My clothes, laptops, work equipment, and anything of value that was clearly mine. I didn't touch any shared furniture or household items. Before leaving, I sat down to write a note. At first it turned into a long explanation, but in the end I decided to keep it simple. On a small piece of paper I wrote just a few words. I hope it was worth it. I placed my wedding ring on top of the note and left it on the kitchen table. As I walked out the door, it felt like an enormous weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long while I felt free. The pain would take time to fade, and I knew there would be emotional baggage to sort through later, but at least I had taken the first step. What I needed most was distance, time alone to clear my head and quietly remove her from my life. Part of me knew that the way I handled it might not seem heroic. I hadn't confronted her with proof, forced a confession, or screamed in anger, but honestly, she didn't deserve that kind of energy from me. In my mind, she had already thrown everything away, the life we built together, our plans for a home, our dreams about starting a family. All of it was gone now, and there was no going back. I felt like I didn't owe her anything anymore. Whatever consequences came from her choices were hers to deal with. I hadn't made any detailed plans or even spoken to a lawyer yet. All I wanted was a clean start and a chance to clear my head. The fresh mountain air around Ray's land turned out to be exactly what I needed. Once I settled into the trailer, I started running again the following week, and for the first time in a long while it felt good just to be alive. While she was away on that trip, Kathy kept sending messages. We just landed. We're having a team dinner tonight. Little updates like that kept appearing on my phone. Eventually the tone changed. Where are you? She asked in a few emails. Why haven't you responded? I didn't reply to any of it. When she finally returned home, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts as she tried repeatedly to reach me, but I ignored every single one. Her mother even tried calling after the first day, though I didn't answer that either. Kathy never attempted to contact my father. He's the only family I have left, and we're not particularly close. After about a week of silence, her messages became more desperate. One of them read, "What is this? We need to talk." She kept insisting that whatever I thought I knew wasn't true, claiming there was no affair and nothing inappropriate going on. Then, after days of getting no response from me, another message came through. This time the tone was different. She admitted she was sorry things had gotten out of hand and tried to justify herself, saying that being involved with someone at work shouldn't matter because I had been away so often. She wrote that she had been distracted with work and claimed she had simply made a mistake. According to her, she had planned to end it eventually. I had been waiting for a confession like that all along. Yet when it finally came, it only made me resent her even more. What bothered me the most was that she still couldn't just be honest. By that point, I had no vision of any kind of future with her anymore. A mistake doesn't drag on for 6 months or a year. That wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Over time, her messages shifted from defensive to desperate. She begged me to come back so we could try to repair the marriage, but I never replied. Even when the messages stopped for a couple of weeks, I stayed silent. I had no intention of letting her find out where I was living or allowing her to pry into the life I had begun rebuilding. That quiet place had become my refuge, and I wasn't about to let her invade it. Eventually, the tone of her texts turned hostile. One day she called me a coward for refusing to speak with her. Another message accused me of not caring about our relationship at all. Then the next one would beg me to come home so we could talk things through. She even wrote that she wanted to know where I was so she could come see me. I don't remember every message she sent, but they were all the same mix of excuses and shallow apologies that lacked any real accountability. I stopped paying attention to them altogether. Whatever came in through one ear went straight out the other. After a while, I changed my phone number entirely. By June 2018, I received an email from Kathy saying she had hired a lawyer and planned to file for divorce. My response was simple. I told her that sounded fine to me. That reply triggered another wave of emails asking me to meet with her or talk things over, but I ignored most of them. Eventually, she wrote that if I agreed to an uncontested divorce, she would stop trying to contact me. Once I realized that was the quickest way to end everything, I agreed. Not long after signing the paperwork, I finally felt truly free. A few months had passed since I had moved out of our apartment, and by then it felt like that chapter of my life had already closed. After that, I never had to see her again. Strangely enough, she seemed far more concerned about that than I was. Neither of us ever really got any closure, but I had already moved on in my own way. For a few months afterward, memories of her would occasionally surface. Sometimes something small, like hearing a song we used to listen to together, would suddenly bring a wave of sadness. But as time passed, those moments became less frequent, and eventually I realized I hardly thought about her at all anymore. Now that the divorce is officially behind me, life has actually been going pretty well. As it turns out, I ended up getting to know a wonderful woman who lives just down the hill from my place. We first met while I was out running on one of the trails. She had a flat tire on her car, and I stopped to help her change it. We started talking and immediately got along. She's a few years younger than me, but she's incredibly kind, fun to be around, and honestly pretty adorable. She likes to joke and call me her mountain man, and she seems to love the simple lifestyle I've settled into. I'm not rushing into anything serious right now, but I'm also not shutting the door on relationships either. For the time being, I have no plans to leave the trailer. I've grown to appreciate the quiet and the simplicity of living out here. Spending more time outdoors and keeping my life uncomplicated has made everything easier to manage, especially the grief and everything connected to my ex-wife. I understand that everyone handles situations like this differently. In my case, I was fortunate that the marriage had only lasted 3 years, and that we didn't have children. Looking back, I truly believe I made the right decision for myself. No one should feel obligated to stay with someone who betrays them like that. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, my advice would be not to let it consume your entire life. Keep moving forward, focus on improving yourself, and eventually things will get better. I've gone back over this story several times just to make it easier to read, but I also wanted to add a small update about my ex-wife. Earlier I mentioned that I had some concerns she might try to track me down. Since I moved away from our old place, which was about 2 hours from here, I had hoped that wouldn't happen. But last weekend, I unexpectedly spotted her at a coffee shop in the small town near where I live now. It didn't feel like a coincidence. Luckily, I managed to slip out before she noticed me. Another quick update. This past weekend I went into town to pick up some groceries and stopped by my usual coffee shop. I often use their free Wi-Fi to catch up on paperwork for work. After finishing what I needed to do, I packed up my things and stepped outside the cafe. I was heading toward my pickup when suddenly I heard someone call out my name, Paul. I turned and looked across the street, and there she was, Kathy. My ex-wife stood there waving at me. For a moment it felt like the final confrontation I had been avoiding had finally arrived. She quickly crossed the street in my direction while I stood frozen, hardly believing what I was seeing. As she approached, it almost looked like she expected to hug me, but I instinctively raised my arms with my palms out, stopping her before she got too close. She looked shaken, almost like she was in real pain. "I've been trying to find you, Paul," she said. "I wanted to see you ever since I heard you moved here. Can we talk for a minute?" At that moment I felt trapped, like an animal stuck in a cage with no clear way out. After a long pause I finally sighed and said, "All right, let's just find somewhere to sit and talk for a few minutes." When she suggested we go to my place, I immediately shut that idea down. Instead, I walked down the street and stopped at a bench outside a small shop. She followed behind me until we both sat down. The first thing she did was comment on how different I looked. She kept saying how much I had changed and how good I looked now. talking about my beard, my fitness, even how my body had transformed. She was dressed in a tank top and short white shorts, her hair tied back in a ponytail the way I used to like. It felt obvious she was trying to turn on the charm. My guard was fully up. I could practically feel the attempt at attraction she was trying to use, and I had to stay focused just to keep my emotions in check and see where this was going. Eventually she started talking about the affair. She said she was sorry, and claimed that after I left, everything had come crashing down on her. According to her, once her workplace found out about the relationship, the situation became so uncomfortable that she eventually resigned. The man she had been involved with, who it turned out had been engaged at the time, faced heavy criticism and was moved to another department in the company. She told me she later contacted his fiancée and revealed the truth after he tried to place all the blame on her, which ended their relationship as well. At that point she lowered her head and began to cry. I didn't say anything. I just sat there quietly, glancing around the street and letting the silence hang in the air. After a moment she straightened up and looked at me again. "What exactly do you want from me?" I finally asked. She insisted that she had never meant for the affair to happen and began explaining that office politics and the pressure of her position had somehow pushed things in that direction. She went on to explain that her coworker had slowly pulled her in, using his charm and influence until she found herself caught up in it. According to her, the whole thing had spiraled out of control, and she admitted that in some ways she had been using him just as much as he had been using her. She claimed that after I confronted her about cheating back then, she had actually intended to confess everything. Instead, she started drinking after work to numb the guilt she was feeling. She said she hated herself during that time and felt completely alone, as if her heart had shattered the moment I left. She insisted that as soon as I disappeared from her life, she ended things with the other man immediately. From her perspective, finding me had become the only thing that mattered. Since I refused to answer her calls or speak with her, she said she had spent months hoping she could locate me and see if there was even the smallest chance we could try again. She knew we were already divorced, but she claimed she wanted a fresh beginning, some way for us to start over. I just stared at her while she talked. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "You don't get to show up here and pretend you can undo everything you did," I said sharply. "Do you really think I'm just going to ignore how you destroyed our marriage? I told you before, once someone cheats, that's it for me. There is no forgiveness, and there's definitely no restarting this relationship. You killed it the moment you walked out on me." My voice kept rising as the anger I'd buried for months pushed its way out. "You ruined everything we had. Our plans, our future, everything. What do you think I am? Some kind of idiot? I saw you that night, you know. I watched you walk into that hotel with him. Did you realize that?" By then I noticed a few people nearby starting to glance in our direction. Kathy suddenly grabbed my arm and broke down crying. She leaned into me, sobbing against my shoulder. I let it go on for a moment before gently pushing her back. "I deserve all of this," she said quietly, looking up at me through tears. "I know I do." After a pause, she took a breath and asked softly, "But would you at least let me take you to dinner? I don't want this conversation to end yet. I want us to be completely honest about everything. You need to spend more time with me, Paul, more than you did before." Her voice trembled as she continued, "Please, I love you so much, even if you don't want to hear it anymore. I didn't realize how much I loved you until you were gone. Losing you broke me just as much as I broke you. I can't forgive myself, and honestly, I don't think I ever will." She broke down completely after saying that, sobbing so hard she began to hyperventilate. For a moment, I didn't know what to do, so I helped her to her feet and pulled her into a brief hug. It felt like the only way to calm her down. Standing there, I realized something I hadn't fully acknowledged before, that in my own way, I had shattered her just as badly as she had shattered me. After a while we walked a short distance and found a quieter spot where we could continue talking. Once she had finally settled down, I asked her the question that had been on my mind since the moment she appeared. "How did you even find me?" I asked. "Did you hire a private investigator or something?" She thought about it for a second, then shook her head with a small laugh. She explained that a few weeks earlier, she had run into Stacy and casually asked how things were going. At first, Stacy didn't mention anything about seeing me, but Kathy kept pressing her for information. Apparently I had warned Stacy not to tell her anything, so she hesitated for a while. But Kathy didn't let it go and kept pushing until Stacy finally gave in. Even then, the only thing Stacy really knew was that I was living somewhere nearby, and that I came into town on my days off. So Kathy started coming to town occasionally, hoping she might run into me. When she told me that, I couldn't help but laugh a little to myself, thinking that Stacy really couldn't keep her mouth shut. Kathy blushed slightly when she noticed my reaction. Eventually, we decided to grab dinner at a small place nearby that had a cozy patio. I made a point of not ordering any drinks because I didn't want alcohol muddying the conversation or giving her an excuse later. Despite everything, the conversation actually went surprisingly well. We talked for quite a while, calmly this time, without any shouting or accusations. When it was over, I walked her back to her car. Before getting in, she told me that she hadn't dated anyone else since everything happened. She said she had ended things with him and swore that I was the only man she truly wanted. Even so, she kept urging me to stay longer, hoping we could keep talking. I shook my head and told her it was still far too soon for me to even consider going down that path again. She asked me more than once to come back to her, but I didn't give her the answer she wanted. Instead, I gave her my new email address and left it at that. When she asked for my phone number, I refused, telling her she would probably flood it with calls and messages anyway. That made her tear up again, but after a moment she admitted I was probably right. Before leaving, she promised she would send me an email about coming back to town the following weekend. Just before she got into her car, I asked her something that had been on my mind. I looked at her and said, "If I had been the one cheating, would you have forgiven me?" She paused for a moment before answering. She said maybe eventually, but only if we went to marriage counseling and spent a lot of time working through it with honest conversations, maybe even some kind of formal agreement to rebuild trust. I thought about that for a second and replied, maybe I could do that in 5 or 10 years. She immediately answered that she would wait if that's what it took. Then she took both of my hands in hers, looked straight into my eyes and said firmly, "Paul, damn it, I will always love you. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that." Those words caught me completely off guard. Even after she drove away, they stayed with me. She had said them with such certainty that it unsettled me more than I expected. Still, despite feeling calmer about everything that had happened, I couldn't picture us getting back together. I wasn't even sure I could see her as a friend yet. Maybe someday, but even that was uncertain. When I got back home, I went for a long run, grabbed a beer afterward, and sat there thinking about how far my life had come since everything fell apart. All I really wanted was to protect the quiet peace I had built for myself. I just hoped she wouldn't end up disrupting it again. The good thing was that I had time now, time to sort through my thoughts and see things more clearly. Even so, the memories were still fresh, still vivid. One last update. This will probably be the final one. When I first shared my story on A Father's Wrath, the moderators kept removing it. In short, I ghosted my ex-wife for more than a year before she discovered me. She wanted to make amends and start over with us. You will be deeply disappointed if you thought I would be the typical beta blue pill fool and forgive her. She expressed her love and regret for the affair in a lengthy email she sent me last week. She offered to come out and stay with me for the weekend once more. My answer, I made it clear that I wasn't going to change my mind. I told her directly that I had no intention of getting back together with her. My life was peaceful now, and I was genuinely content living on my own, enjoying the quiet, the isolation, and the simplicity of the life I had built. At 32, I didn't feel any pressure to rush into something new. I had my own direction and goals, and along the way, I had enjoyed the company of a few women and the friendships I had formed out here. In my reply email, I explained all of that to her. I also told her I wouldn't be giving her my phone number. I wrote that I no longer truly knew her or trusted her after everything that had happened. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I wished her the best moving forward, and added that maybe someday, far down the road, we might be able to be friends, but that moment certainly wasn't now. My response seemed to frustrate her. In her reply, she revealed something that made her intentions a lot clearer. She admitted that she had recently accepted a job in another state. Her real hope had been that I would agree to go with her, thinking that my remote work would make relocating easy. In her mind, moving somewhere new together would have given us the chance to start over from scratch. She had wanted to see me in person again so she could try to convince me before she left. But by the time that email exchange ended, she was already running out of time to make that move. Fortunately for me, her window had already closed, because I already had a week-long business trip scheduled. Honestly, I'm relieved knowing she won't be a part of my life anymore. Sooner or later she'll have to accept that whatever we once had is truly over. I wouldn't be surprised if a few more emails show up, but eventually she'll have to move on and find someone else. Though who knows, she might end up repeating the same mistakes again. For anyone reading this, all I can say is, make the most of your life. Don't stay chained to the past. Let go, rebuild yourself, and find the strength to keep moving forward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more shocking real-life experiences, don't forget to subscribe to A Father's Wrath and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps the channel bring you more powerful and unforgettable stories. See you in the next one.